8 days before the Iowa caucuses, my conversation with Ron DeSantis about his strategy is coming up. The big news, in my view, is that the media are throwing in the towel. Here's Politico. The defining feature of the race is just how uncompetitive it's become. Donald Trump has already iced the rest of the field, trouncing his competitors like a slow-motion coronation. Washington Post. A growing sense among political veterans across the state that the basic outcome is set and a Trump victory is all but assured. And that view has spread to television.
We've been talking about this as if it's a real race, but so far we haven't seen evidence that there is anyone who's going to be able to steal this mantle from Trump.
Donald Trump is still the front runner among Republicans, and any attempt by his rivals to sell themselves as reasonable alternatives are going even further down the tubes.
If she does not have a strong performance, that could spell trouble for the end of her campaign. And once again, another opportunity for Donald Trump to really run away with this.
If Donald Trump was an insurrectionist, he should not be allowed or able to run for office. And if he's disqualified, that isn't undemocratic.
That, of course, a reference to the ballot bans, and the Supreme Court late Friday agreed to hear the former president's appeal of the all-Democratic Colorado court's decision. Trump's also appealed to the courts in Maine, the ruling by the Democratic and highly partisan Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows. Nikki Haley still trying to distance herself from the uproar over her refusal to use the word slavery when asked the cause of the Civil War.
The media is the only one that has talked about this issue.
No, that's actually not true.
Not one person on the ground. I should have said slavery. I didn't do it. I immediately, the very next day, came out and said I was wrong.
But fairly or unfairly, the press is now describing the contest between Haley and DeSantis as a battle for second place. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. Also ahead, Claudine Gay finally forced out as Harvard's president and plays the race card. As Joe Biden and Donald Trump call each other a threat to democracy, there's other news about the Iowa caucuses involving Bret Baier and Martha MacCallum.
Fox News is hosting a town hall with former President Donald Trump. It is scheduled for January 10th in Des Moines, Iowa. And
what about the CNN candidate debate?
If you're Donald Trump, there's no reason to show up. So bad for CNN and the American public, although he's going to be on Fox.
And that's the twist. Trump, who's certainly taking his jabs at Fox, is doing this network's town hall at the exact same time, 9 Eastern this Wednesday night, as the CNN debate, a classic bit of counter-programming and something of a ratings showdown. Joining us now to analyze the coverage in Nashville, Clay Travis, founder of OutKick and co-host of a nationally syndicated radio show. And in Denver, Lucy Caldwell, an independent and former campaign manager for Congressman Joe Walsh. Clay, do you agree the media have basically given up, smacked their foreheads, and conceded that Donald Trump is going to win Iowa and then wrap up the nomination?
I think that a lot of media has adopted that narrative. I actually think there still may be a little bit of drama here because the expectation that Trump's going to win Iowa means that if Ron DeSantis can, let's say, get within 10 points, that the storyline will be, oh, wow, DeSantis outperformed expectations. And I also believe Nikki Haley is going to be very competitive in New Hampshire. And so I think people are overlooking that a little bit. Now, the question that still emerges and is the most important is who's going to be the number two, right? Because I do think we're going to get a 1v1 by the time we head down to the South in South Carolina. And if that occurs, is there anyone 1v1, Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley, that could give Trump a run into March? I don't think Nikki Haley can. I think there's a possibility that Ron DeSantis could. But look, if you were asking me to handicap what are the odds right now that Trump is going to be the nominee, I think there's a 90% chance that he will be the nominee. But I do think, again, there's a 10% chance that we could have a little bit of excitement in Iowa and in New Hampshire just because the expectations for Trump are so high in terms of him coming out and swamping all of his opponents.
So you're leaving a 10% chance. Well, I'm going to jump ahead now because this question came up on CBN, asked to Nikki Haley about whether she would consider eventually a status as Donald Trump's running mate. Let's roll it.
You're not going to rule it out.
It's not even a conversation, and it doesn't matter what candidate wants me to answer it. I don't play for second.
So, Lucy, that was sort of a non-answer because she didn't say under no circumstances would I. She just said she's not aiming to be VP. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, what difference does it make, really? First of all, it's not going to happen. There's so much bad blood between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. He's going to blow her out in her own state. She's going to lose big in South Carolina. So, you know, it's sort of, I guess, an interesting thought exercise, but there's no realm in this universe that we live in which Nikki Haley is Donald Trump's running mate. Her answer was the right one, because why get sort of bogged down by giving Donald Trump an opportunity to say, I would never have whatever he calls her, crooked Nikki, globalist Nikki, as my running mate. Right.
Well, let me just follow up with you, Lucy, because the press, as Clay just suggested, gets into these scenarios. What if DeSantis does better than expected in Iowa? What if Christie drops out? What if Haley then can be very competitive in New Hampshire? But then in the next breath or the next paragraph, it's like, oh, well, but there's still long shots.
Well, they are still long shots. Donald Trump is up 30 points in Iowa. And the other problem with the narrative around could there be someone who could surge and give Donald Trump a run for its money is that assumes that everyone who is voting for a candidate or expressing a preference for a candidate who is not Donald Trump, that they are all a monolith, right? That they all are anti-Trump Republican primary voters. That's not true. Someone who is supporting Vivek Ramaswamy is not suddenly going to jump to Chris Christie or Nikki Haley, right? Like for many of these people, if their chosen candidate drops out, their second choice is going to be Donald Trump. So you have to also kind of keep in mind that how they're doing in the polls is made more complicated by the fact that those candidates that are second, third, fourth, and fifth are very different from each other.
Well, you're spoiling all the fun as lots of journalists head to Iowa. Clay, with Trump now appealing those two ballot bans, Maine, Colorado, do these attempts to boot him, could they actually wind up helping him, just like the 4 indictments, by making it seem the Democrats will do anything to block him?
100% they help him. And I hope the Supreme Court, when they hear this case, is going to rule 9-0 against Colorado and against Maine and put this to bed. My concern is that they're going to actually rule 6-3, and then Democrats are going to come out and say this is why we need to expand the court because Donald Trump is being protected by his own appointees. I mean, this is a radical idea that you're going to use a Civil War era constitutional provision to try to remove a leading presidential contender by the opposing party that is sitting in power right now. It's why, when you really think about it, Joe Biden deciding to speak in Valley Forge and try to claim that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy and that you have to vote for him if you care about democracy. We've never seen a situation where the sitting president's own Department of Justice has been trying to put his chief political opponent in prison for the rest of his life and not allow his name to appear on a ballot to run against him. I think Joe Biden is actually the existential threat to democracy. And I think all of these attacks help Trump because it plays into what he's saying, which is that the deep state and everyone else in the Democrat Party is aligned against him.
Right. I mean, I would just quibble with the idea that Joe Biden personally has ginned up all these prosecutions, but I do want to play for both of you.
I think 100% Joe Biden is involved, by the way. I understand that talking point is out there. I don't think there's any way that Merrick Garland is doing what he's doing to Donald Trump without, and Jack Smith without Joe Biden's
Is Joe Biden also orchestrating the prosecution of his son, Clay? Is that part of his broad corruption in DOJ?
Well, he's orchestrating the protection of his son. I think the sweetheart deal that they gave, that Judge Mary Ellen Noriega refused to rubber stamp, to her credit, would have given Hunter Biden a get-out-of-jail-free card. And I don't think that there's any chance at all that Joe Biden's going to avoid. He's going to pardon Hunter Biden as soon as this election is over, regardless of whether he wins or loses, in my opinion, and keep Hunter from ever doing a day in prison.
Yeah, I always avoid predictions because they can burn you. I want to play an extremely unusual online ad from a group that supports Donald Trump, and then briefly get reactions from both of you on the other side.
God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, fix this country, work all day, fight the Marxists, eat supper, then go to the Oval Office and stay past midnight at a meeting of the heads of state. So God made Trump. Call out the fake news for their tongues as sharp as a serpent's.
I think my tongue is pretty smooth right now, but Clay first. Got about half a minute for each of you. Won't some people find that offensive, or is it a satire designed to generate media chatter?
I think that it is a satire designed to devote media chatter. I think that Trump's sense of humor and his campaign sense of humor is often lost. Now, I do believe that many of the Trump supporters believe that he is a salvation. They are evangelical. They believe that he is sent from God. That's not uncommon when it comes to politics, but I think this is designed to get tongues wagging and drive everybody crazy.
Lucy, God made Trump.
I don't think that they think he's salvation. I think they think he's a Cyrus-like character, and this kind of homage to Paul Harvey is another moment to make that case. Look, I think that people for whom this message resonates, they're already pretty bought into Trump, especially parts of the evangelical base. I think that for those who are not, this ad probably seems a little weird, but it certainly goes to Trump's megalomania that he immediately turned around and shared it on Truth Social. So what else is new?
Yeah, he did share it, and I guess different people will take it in different ways. Most of the media have ignored it. So how important, Clay, is Donald Trump's town hall on Fox going up against the CNN candidate debate with DeSantis and Haley, especially if he trounces them in the ratings?
It's super smart. Look, Fox News is going to likely dominate CNN head-to-head when you put Trump on, and he knows that. And more importantly, how many people that are going to be voting in the Republican primary are going to be watching CNN compared to Fox News? Trump will have more eyeballs on him than will be watching CNN. I think it's incredibly smart. I think it's a counter-programming strategy that he has frankly embraced since all of these debates began, and it's going to continue.
Lucy, the media used to say, well, Trump is unelectable in the general election. They're not saying that now, especially after a USA Today poll showing the former president leading Biden among Hispanics and younger voters.
Well, I think it remains to be seen. And as we know, the election is really going to come down to a handful of battleground states. And I think that the battleground states that we think of the election coming down to may not even be the battleground states that it comes down to, right? I think it probably comes down to Pennsylvania, for example. So it's hard to square national polls with the outcome. But, you know, yes, it's going to be a very tight race either way. It's too early to know what's going to happen.
Well, that's good news for journalists, which love tight horse races. Ahead, my sit down with Ron DeSantis. But when we come back, Harvard president Claudine Gay is finally pushed out, and she blames it on her race.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.